What's up, guys? Welcome to my new dedicated Final Cut and Motion channel. Make sure you are subscribed to this channel if you want to learn more about Final Cut and Apple Motion. Today, we're going to go over the basics of keyframing. This video was inspired because in one of my Final Cut Facebook groups, some users said that keyframing was outdated and somebody needed to come up with a newer system. And when he teaches people how to edit on Final Cut, this is the point in the learning process where they lose interest, is keyframing. And to that I say, you are not a professional editor unless you know how to keyframe. Keyframing is so important. You can do anything in Final Cut or Apple Motion if you know how to keyframe. So you can literally have an idea in your head and actually execute it without relying on presets. You can really execute it exactly as you envisioned if you understand keyframing. Now, when I was coming up and learning editing, yeah, I get it. Keyframing is the kind of thing you might get stuck on a little bit. So we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to first start in Final Cut, where keyframing is a little bit more, it's a little bit less robust, let's say. And then we're going to move on over to Apple Motion and get a little bit more advanced. But I'm going to take this so slow with you guys so you really can master the skill, the necessary skill of keyframing. So here we are in Final Cut, and I think what makes the most sense is to start with audio keyframing because I think it's going to make a lot of sense to you when it comes to an audio file as opposed to like really tricky visual keyframing. So what I'm gonna do is just connect this music track underneath my main timeline here. And let's take a good look at what this looks like here in Final Cut. So in the audio file, you see this little line here. Do you see that? Where you can adjust the levels. I can bring the levels down to nothing. I can bring them all the way up to 12, which is going to blow out our ears. We don't want to do that. The default is, of course, 0. So I like to start teaching people about keyframing with this audio track because this line is here and it gives you a very simple representation of your keyframes, and it's really like visual and easy to understand because really the only keyframing to be done on audio is the volume, right? So we're going to start real basic. We're going to start with audio keyframing. So let's just play this so you can hear this music track. I've got my audio levels here. And here in my inspector window, I've got my volume control here as well. So let's say we're starting with this music, and right here at about the 5-second mark, we want the music to fade down because let's say we have like somebody talking coming in, whether it's like just a voice file like narration or a soundbite or something. So we want to start out strong with that music at the beginning of our video, but then we want it to fade down. So we can do that through keyframes. I'm just going to hit Apple Plus to zoom here on my timeline so we can get real close and I can show you about these keyframes. So if I want to create a keyframe on my audio file, I just hit the Option key and hover over that line until I get this little diamond shape, and then this little adjust volume pop-up will show up. And I've added a keyframe. But what did that do? It didn't do anything yet because we haven't made adjustments to that keyframe. So if I play this back, it's going to sound exactly like it did the first time we heard it. You can see in my audio meters that the levels are the same. Okay. So if we grab this keyframe and adjust the volume, look at what happens. The entire music track comes up and down with it. Nothing happens because you need more than one keyframe for some sort of change to happen. So let's move our cursor down, I don't know, a second or two, and let's add another keyframe by hitting Option and clicking on that little bar. And now look, we've got 2 keyframes. Do you see those here? Now if I grab this second one, watch the line. See how it slopes down? I'm going to turn this one way up, way higher than I ever would, just so you can see. And I'll bring these keyframes closer together so you can really see that the volume is lowering. Look, the waveforms are smaller. We can see that this part of the music is quieter than that part. Now we can change how long it takes for that fade to happen by grabbing our keyframe and making the fade longer, or we can bring it back and make it shorter. Now let's say our soundbite is over. I'm going to hit Apple minus to zoom out a little bit so you can see. Now let's add more keyframes to bring the volume up. So we're going to hit Option, click the line to add a keyframe. Now watch what happens. Let's say I want to boost the volume up and I just hit this one. Look at what it's done. It dips down, and now it's slowly going to get much louder over time. That's not what you want in most circumstances. You have to add what's called like a hold keyframe. So let me explain that to you. I'm going to hit Apple Z to go back to our original volume setting. So you can see here, this volume line is flat all the way across. We're at -22. From this point to this point, it's the same. Now what I need to do is add a fourth keyframe right here. Option, click, and dial up. So what we've got here is our volume is set to 12. Then it's set to -22 for this entire duration of the clip. And now it's up to 8. Let's go back up to 12 just to make it uniform. Got it? So that's how keyframing works. Now, how do we navigate in the inspector window with volume keyframes? Let me show you. This little doohickey here, this diamond, you can actually add keyframes right up here in the inspector window. So you don't have to go down to the line and click. You could just add a keyframe here, okay? Or you can turn off your keyframe by re-clicking it. So when you add a keyframe, now look at my timeline, there's a keyframe. This little button turns yellow. When you delete it by clicking it off, look, the keyframe's vanished. Okay, so that's how the keyframe editing in Final Cut works in the inspector. If I want to jump from keyframe to keyframe, see this little arrow? I hit it and I jump to the previous keyframe. Previous. Now that I'm on the third keyframe in my timeline, I actually have 2 arrows, so I can go forward and backward. So I hope, and let me know in the comments, that is a really easy way for you to understand the keyframes. So it's like the start of action, the actual action, the holding of the new setting, and then if you want, going back somewhere else, okay? So let's do something different. Let's do a visual keyframe in Final Cut. Now we're gonna jump over to motion in a little while, and we're going to get much more detailed with keyframes in motion. Motion has a lot more capabilities, but for now, we're just going to start in Final Cut. We're going to keep it simple. All right, so I'm going to drop in this time-lapse shot. And let me just play it back for you so you can see what the clip is. So it's the silhouette of someone standing in front of a beautiful starry sky. I have a feeling this is composited, but that's okay. We're going to go with it. So you see here that the sky rotates. The man looks around a little bit, but there's really no other like camera movements here. So we're going to add some camera movements. Let's try to zoom in on this video. So we'll do like a slow, gradual zoom in. So what we're going to do is make sure we're selected on our clip in the timeline, and we're going to head on over to the inspector window. So you can't really change the keyframes in Final Cut on the clip like you can with the audio files. We have to do it all in the inspector. So I'm going to make sure I'm selected on this clip, and I'm going to add a keyframe by hitting this little button here. Okay, so I've made a keyframe on the scale value. And by hitting the top one, it automatically clicks the X and Y scale values on to be keyframed as well. You could do them separately, but that would distort the image. We don't want to do that. And I'm going to drag my playhead down at the end of the clip where I want the zoom to stop moving. And I'm going to create another keyframe, and now I'm going to zoom in. So let's watch that back. Okay, pretty cool, right? But look, by the end of the frame, we're starting to lose the guy. We're losing the land. He looks like he's just floating. So how can we fix that with keyframes? Of course we can, right? So what we want to do is, again, cue up to the top of our clip, make sure it's selected. Now let's add a keyframe on the position value. Keyframe here, head on down to the last frame of our clip, add a keyframe, and we are going to change the Y value so that the land is still in view with our clip here as it zooms in. Keyframes. If you can do that, you're the master of the universe, right? Okay, so let's get a little bit more complicated here. So as we know, we can jump from keyframe to keyframe using these arrows in the inspector window. And as we jump from keyframe to keyframe, you can see which keyframes are activated in our inspector window. So I've got keyframes at the same points for position and scale. Now, here's a little bit advanced placement. We're going to select the clip. I'm going to hold down the Control key and V, and we can open it up and actually see, if you look real close, you can see our little keyframes in there. So here, I can actually move the keyframes around. So if I wanted the action to start later in the clip and happen faster, I could just drag these keyframes down here and watch what happens. Okay, so that's pretty much what the keyframes do in Final Cut. The keyframe editor in Final Cut it's not amazing. It also does something I actually don't like, and you know I love Final Cut, so for me to talk bad about Final Cut is like pretty bad. I must be pretty frustrated. Let me just show you one other thing here. We're going to select our clip and we're going to hit this button here, which is the transform menu. And now we can visually see our keyframes in our canvas. And it's showing me this is one point in my keyframe. This is another point in my keyframe. Now, if I right click this point, there's some options here. We've got linear and smooth. It defaults to smooth. And let me just play this back and point something out to you to show you what smooth means in Final Cut. Watch the horizon of the land. See how it kind of goes up and then comes back down a little bit. Do you see that? Whoa. So it's kind of giving you this ease in to the move. It's almost like an S curve kind of shape. If you wanted to make it a more linear move, so you're really just going from point A to point B, as you have told Final Cut 2, you actually need to change those to linear keyframes. Linear, linear. Got it? So that's the basics of keyframing in Final Cut. Let's hop on over to Apple Motion, because Apple Motion has, in my opinion, a much better keyframing capability and system. So I'm going to open up Apple Motion here. We can do a lot more, like I said, with keyframes in Apple Motion than we can in Final Cut. So let's just look at the inspector window here in this project. It's going to look really familiar to you, right? You see the same setup. You see the little keyframes. You can keyframe anything. Look at this. You can keyframe the drop shadow. You can keyframe the distortion. You can keyframe the crop. Everything you can keyframe in Apple Motion. This is why keyframing is so powerful. This is why I talk about keyframing so much in my tutorials. So let's add some keyframes to this text. I'm going to hit text over in the inspector window. Let's look at the tracking here. The tracking is the spacing of our characters. So what I think I want to do is have these characters start kind of spread out and then gather in closer together. So we're going to cue up our playhead toward the beginning of our timeline. I'm going to create a keyframe on the tracking line, and let's spread these guys out. Now we can go further down in the timeline and gather them in. So I'm sure you can guess how this is going to look, but I'm just going to play it back for you. And in Apple Motion, unlike in Final Cut, the keyframe default is a linear action, but you can change the motion of your animation so much in Apple Motion. Let me show you. The first thing you need to know is that here in our regular timeline here, you can see the keyframes. I've created these keyframes. I can move them around here in my timeline. But do you see this little guy down here? This is amazing. This is the keyframe editor. If you don't see this in Apple Motion, you want to click these 3 diamonds, and here comes your keyframe editor. And this is where all the keyframe magic happens in Apple Motion. Let's select our first keyframe. I'm going to hover my cursor over it. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to head on over to interpolation. And as you can see, the interpolation is linear. We are going to change this to the Bezier, that's the fancy way to pronounce it, option. And look at what you've got here. These are called like handles. I can grab this little handle and I can change the shape of the curve. So remember, it was a straight line before, it was linear. But look what I can do. I can really play with the bend of this action here. So let me play it back. I'll leave it there. Let's see what that does. So it really eases in. See how slow it goes? And then more of a straight line, and then it slows again at the end. Let me play that back again so you can see that. Slow start, faster, and kind of slows down there. Now let's select the second keyframe. And like, what if we made the curve look like that? Let's see what that looks like. See that sharp curve there? Look at how it changed the acceleration. Boop. Okay. So let's play with this to get an action we kind of really like. Let's add some more keyframes so I can show you how to really navigate the keyframe editor here in Motion. So one of the other things we can make keyframes with in Apple Motion when it comes to text or any other objects is color. We can actually keyframe the color. So I'm going to spread out these keyframes again, kind of more where we originally had them. All right, now let's play with that color. Let's add a keyframe. The keyframes here also, by the way, don't have to be aligned with other Motion keyframes. Let's start like right at the very beginning of our timeline. And we've created a keyframe, and you can see this new keyframe has appeared on our main timeline, but nothing yet is happening in our keyframe editor. Let's pick like this color. And of course, because that's the only keyframe we've made in terms of color, it's just going to stay pink the whole time. But what if we want it to turn a different color by the end of our animation? I'm going to go back over to the inspector window, back over to color, create my keyframe, and now let's look at the keyframe editor. All these lines have shown up that are being modified, and I'm going to select the color swatch. I don't know, let's pick this teal. So now let's look at what's happening. I'm just going to scrub my playhead so you can see everything happening slow. The color's transforming, the motion is happening, and then we're landing on our final color and tracking position at the same time. All right, let's take another look at that keyframe editor. So this is where things start to get like very crowded in the keyframe editor, because that color keyframe actually created 3 different keyframes because it's doing the red, green, and blue tones. I can select all 3 of those value modifications by dragging a square or a rectangle around those keyframes. Then they're all selected now. See how they're white? I can right click. I can change the interpolation. I'm going to make it Bezier again. I'm going to make sure I'm adjusting all of the colors at the same time. So I've got 3 handles here. Let's do, I don't know, this. Then I'm going to head down to the end, select these guys. And it gets a little confusing here. If you look at the keyframe editor, it's like a bunch of keyframes all clustered together, and I'm not sure which one is my tracking and which one are my colors. So go on over to here, and you can see what's being animated. So the purple line tells us that's the tracking line. The colors are these designated colors here. This is how we keep track of our keyframes. So I'm going to select these guys. They're overlapping. This is my green and blue, and I'm going to select the red one. And so I'm leaving out the purple one, and I'm going to play with these handles. Let's see what we got. So the other thing that we can keyframe is, let's say, a filter that you want to apply to any of the objects in your motion project. So let's head on over to filters. Let's go to distortion. Let's get the disc warp going. I'm going to start the disc warp up high, sort of out of frame. So I've got it not really affecting my text very much. And I'm going to add a keyframe here. And then I want it to come down and bounce this text and then go back up above my frame, so it's not really affecting the text anymore. So I've added my keyframe. I'm going to add another keyframe to bring it down. Boop. And then move down my timeline more, add another keyframe, and raise it back up. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so that motion is very linear, isn't it? So you can see here that these moves are very like just straight lines. I'm going to select them all, right click, interpolation, Bezier. This kind of design, I'm not really thinking too much about how it's going to look or how I would use this, but I hope that kind of sheds some light on how you can use keyframes to step up your animations in Apple Motion or the stuff that you're doing in Final Cut. This disc warp effect is not something that you could do with a preset in Apple Motion. You could only do it if you knew how to keyframe. So let me know, did this help you understand keyframing more? Did it get you excited about using keyframes? I hope that it did. I'd love to hear if that was the case for you. Make sure that you're subscribed to this YouTube channel. This is my new YouTube channel just for Final Cut and Apple Motion users. I'm gonna have a lot more tutorials like this on this channel, so you don't wanna miss out. Make sure you smash that subscribe button and ring the bell. And if you're new to Final Cut and you really want a good basic course and basic understanding of how Final Cut works, go to JennJager.com. That is where I have my Final Cut Rockstar tutorial that'll really take you through an entire project start to finish. I give you all the media. It is a great tutorial. I got a lot of good compliments on it. Thank you so much for watching, you guys, and I will see you again.